Andrei Svechnikov again in back of the goal. He stops in a dive. Lacrosse move. Scores! What a goal! Andrei Svechnikov reaches into those bag of tricks for some magic. A highlight reel goal.
Nylander centers. Shot. Scores! Matthews! What a bullet! And Auston Matthews scores on the power play.
Orlov down to Ovechkin. He scores! Alex Ovechkin in overtime. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Toronto.
Hello, everybody. It's time for another episode of Our Line Starts. I'm with Patrick Sharp and Keith Jones this week. Sharpie, the rookie, you're making your debut.
Yeah, first time. I don't know. I thought podcasts were just audio, but we had hair and makeup, and we're all dressed up, ready to go. So let's get into it.
Reveal God you're secrets. Here, buddy. Yeah. I mean, podcasting is different. You're in the media landscape now. This is a whole new thing for you.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get used to this. They said we could swear now.
Yeah.
It's a little natural.
Bilberry's
to me,
the only one that has so far.
Yeah,
so.
We'll leave it at Mike being the only one to swear. I'll keep it clean.
I'm surprised Jonesy hasn't yet.
No, I don't. I would never swear.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, let's talk about what's coming up on tap on this episode. We've got Roman Josi gets paid. Indeed, he did. We're going to chat all about that new deal for the Nashville Predators. Ovi's candid comments on the Leafs. Do you think he hit a nerve with them? Pierre Maguire chats with Julien BriseBois, the general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the guy's favorite memories of Halloween pranks, because we've seen a couple of them throughout the NHL this week, and it's been fun to see. And I know you guys, for one, have been very big on pranks over your career, so I'm sure you've been thinking long and hard about this one.
Yeah.
Yeah? All right. Yeah. Let's start with Roman Josi's new deal. He gets a long-term, 8-year, $72 million contract, average $9 million per year. This is we've been waiting for this to happen. Do you think it was the right deal, Sharpie, in the end?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't think there's a better defenseman in the National Hockey League than Roman Josi. There's a few that you could put in the same caliber of him. He does it all offensively, defensively. He plays all situations. But for me, every one of these 8-year deals looks bad at the end. And I don't want to put dampers on the Nashville Predators. I would have signed him to 8 years. I would have given him his money. But I always just think, hey, let's check in 5, 6, 7 years at the landscape of that defense in Nashville. But right now, they look good, don't they? They look like a Stanley Cup contender, and Josi's kind of leading the way.
And without having Subban's contract there, they're able to do it. So I like it. I mean, I agree with you. And in year 6, 7, and 8, we might not see the same player, but he is a unique talent. And he does skate extremely well, so possibly his legs are going to be there. Normally, the biggest drop-off is the speed of a player and how quickly he plays the game. Josi may be one of the exceptions to that, but there's not many.
It's not even about Roman Josi. It's more these long-term contracts at that age, 29, 30 years old. You start playing deep into your 30s, and look what happens all across the league. It's a 25 and under league. You try not to be as tied down as some teams are with those long-term contracts, but Roman Josi, he's a pro, difficult guy to play against, and maybe he withstands those 8 years. Who knows?
And the worry is if you let him go, that he's irreplaceable, and you spend the next 7, 8 years trying to find somebody that you could have had for a great player for 5 or 6 years, and that's the dilemma that teams are faced with. So I get it, I understand it. I think Nashville Predator fans are lucky to have him, and he's been even better this year. When they've needed him to do more, he's been the guy that stepped up and done it and leading still a very good defense, even though it's not as deep as it was.
Yeah, and the contract talks just appeared to not even get in the way of what he was doing. I mean, some guys that can be a distraction, but it's also, by the way, it carries a no-trade movement. So at some point after 5, 6 years, they do want to move him. They're going to have to go to Roman Josi and say, where do you want to go? But I was actually surprised. I thought he was going to get more, because you look at this, makes him the 3rd highest paid defenseman per year when it goes into play. You've got Erik Karlsson making 11. You've got Drew Doughty making 11. I mean, I thought he'd get somewhere in the 10 to 11 million range.
Yeah, and that's why he's still in Nashville. If he elected to go out and hit the free agent market, he would have gotten even more. David Poile has a pretty good way at getting his message across to players and giving them the type of message that wants them to stay. He treats his players extremely well. I was fortunate to play for him for 5 years in Washington, and type of general manager, even when he trades you, that calls you afterwards to almost apologize to you that he's moving you. So I do think that type of relationship matters, and a veteran GM that's been there since the teams started in Nashville, I think it's important. I think it plays a part in why Josi signed.
A top GM as well. Seems like every year he's improving that team in Nashville. I look back at the early part of my career when Barry Trotz was kind of running the show behind the bench there. They just had a hard-working, grinding team, strong defensively, and they've kind of kept that model. 2 good goaltenders, a strong back end, and you sprinkle in forwards like Matt Duchene, all of a sudden you got a Stanley Cup contender there. They looked pretty good last night.
Yeah, and they've been a contender for a couple seasons now. It looks like that's not going to change anytime soon. Plus, it's an unbelievable place to play, number one, in the arena. But then the city itself, I mean, so many people are moving to Nashville, not just hockey players. I mean, it's a great city to be in. It's up and coming, great restaurants, great energy. So if you're an NHLer, that's one of the top cities you'd want to play in, right, Jonesy?
Pretty good life,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, not a bad deal.
Part of this league now is recruiting and having a city that players want to play in. Vegas is seeing and reaping the rewards of that right now as well. So Nashville, the city itself, has a lot to do with why a player like Roman Josi elects not to go out and seek free agency because it's an awesome place to play. Yeah. And they have proven that. The fans show up, the fans are into it, and the players love playing in front of a lively audience like that.
The no state tax helps.
It
does, yeah.
And you look at Carlson's $11 million in San Jose in California versus Yossi's $9 million. At the end of the day, those paychecks are going to be pretty close.
Yeah, same thing with Drew Doughty as well in California. So, all right, well, we like the contract. It's going to work out well for Roman Josi and the Nashville Predators. Meanwhile, the Toronto Maple Leafs have had a big spotlight on them. They always do every season, but this year it just seems even more heightened. And now you've got the captain of the Washington Capitals, a man by the name of Alex Ovechkin, chiming in. He had this to say about what he thinks are the problems happening in that Leafs locker room.
For them, they're still a young group of guys, and I hope they're gonna learn. But again, it's up to them how they want to do it, and if they want to play for yourself, or if they want to win if you want to win Stanley Cup, they have to play differently.
Well, there's a veteran player who's gone through it himself, who takes a look over and sees himself, saws what he went through, and things like that always sting way more when it's right.
How many times did they lose at Pittsburgh before they finally broke through? So, I'm not saying it's the same situation, but I'm sure you asked them on that side, repeatedly how many times over and over that they were kind of ousted by one team and weren't able to kind of get over that hump, and then they obviously finally accomplished that.
So Alex Ovechkin's comments, you had Mike Babcock saying, kind of agree with what he said. You've got Auston Matthews giving his perspective on it. I loved the comments from Ovi. I think it was a little bit blown out of proportion, Sharpie, maybe that it was taken the wrong way. I think he was just being honest of what his experience was, and maybe that's what's happening with the Leafs. But what did you think of it?
I think I agree with you. When I read the comments, I thought, wow, this is a little bit controversial here. Ovi taking a shot at the Leafs, Auston Matthews kind of firing back. But when you watch the interview, there's no harm done there. That's a guy in Ovechkin that's kind of speaking the truth. He lived it more than anybody. Year after year, he was a top player in the NHL, and then, 2 weeks into playoffs, he was jumping on a plane and going to the World Championships year after year. Finally got the message, and now you watch Ovi play in the playoffs. They won the Cup 2 years ago. He was dominant. And then last year, they lost to Carolina. But remember how good he was in that 7-game series? He comes to play in those big moments. He's kind of taking the foot off the gas offensively a little bit in those big moments. He buys into the team game. His teammates can say the same thing in Washington, but those are the steps you have to take to get to that next level. In Toronto, have they had a team that could go all the way? They're playing Boston in the first round every year. They're always a top team. It's a difficult road, but what was most interesting was Babcock, the head coach of the team, kind of letting his players know, hey, this is a guy that's lived it and done it, so let's do it the right way.
Ovi must, in his mind, see a team in Toronto that is a potential threat and good enough to win a Stanley Cup. At least, if they're not there yet, very close to doing it. Otherwise, he wouldn't even make those comments. So it's actually a compliment to where he thinks the Leafs are in their evolution. And I do believe he looks back on his own career and thinks about how many good Capitals teams he was on that fell short. And so much of it, Sharpie, as you know better than anybody, you won 3 cups. It isn't necessarily who you play. It's how you match up against the team that you're playing. And the Leafs have ran into a Boston Bruins team that's going to beat most teams. A very difficult path to go through if they're going to get through Boston and get through a team like Washington, who they also met previously in the playoffs, at least recently. They're going to have to play a different brand of hockey when the playoffs roll around. So I'm not sure that Ovi wants to give them too much information. I think that's the big reason why Mike Babcock is so thrilled that Ovi had those comments.
You got to love those morning skates in Toronto too, right? The room just floods with media members. every player on the team's got to answer questions about something. So you better be ready when you go play the Leafs to answer the media in the morning, because comments can blow up like that.
When you had an opponent that you thought was close to achieving what you guys had done, say after you won your first or second cup, were you providing them the information? Would you, if you did, would it be kind of a backhand slap to them? Or
I was always more complimenting what we did, pumping our own tires up a little bit. But we were in a similar situation 2008-9. We just couldn't get over the hump with the Detroit Red Wings. And they were the top team in the West for a lot of years. And it seemed like just when we got some momentum going, we couldn't get over the hurdle of beating the Wings. And even when we won that cup in 2010, we didn't have to play the Wings. And who knows what would have happened if we did. Didn't play him in 2011 or 12, but in the Stanley Cup playoff run in 2013, we eventually beat them in the second round of the playoffs. And that was like one of the biggest series that I've ever played in. My teammates can say the same thing. Seabrook scores the Game 7 overtime winner, come back from 3-1 in the series, and it was like that weight is lifted off your chest all of a sudden. And even though we have 2 Stanley Cups, we finally slayed the dragon in the Detroit Red Wings. So I agree with you. It's not always who you play, it's who you don't play.
Do you think Ovi really cares, Jonesy? Like, I don't even think he cares what Toronto thinks or if he thinks they're good enough to beat the Capitals, let's say, down the road for a chance to win a Stanley Cup. I think he's just speaking his mind.
He is. And if you read his comments, I agree with Sharpie. You would think that he was kind of rubbing it in a little bit. But when you see him speaking, he's just talking openly to a extremely educated hockey fan base that asks very good questions. And so I do believe that Ovechkin was just being honest. I don't think he worries about a whole lot.
I don't think he cares too much about the Toronto Maple Leafs.
It's a good answer. His answer's a truthful answer.
Yeah.
But again, the Maple Leafs team that he played last night, the Caps eventually won the game, is not a team with their captain in the lineup. And Tavares, when he returns, I think he may have a little bit more to say in regards to what that team needs to do. And I think he's a guy that recognizes, maybe even more than some of the younger guys, what needs to happen. Yeah,
it makes a big difference when Tavares is in the lineup. Those matchups are way differently. But, hey, it's a good opportunity for a guy like Auston Matthews, who kind of fired back at Ovechkin, to show that he can handle those top-line minutes against the other team's best players. We know he can score. We know he's going to lead the league in goals, maybe this year, if not in the coming years. But can he be out there when the game's on the line? Do you want him on the ice in the D zone for that big face-off? And without John Tavares, Matthews moves up, and he's that guy right now. So it's a good test for the Leafs.
Yeah, I don't know about that locker room without Tavares right now. I think there's a lack of leadership. You forget that Patrick Marleau was in that locker room for the last 2 seasons, too, and he was a huge, calming, kind of fatherly-type veteran presence in that locker room, helping those guys, one, keep their mouths shut. I don't think Auston Matthews should have even chimed in on what Ovi said. But
yeah, but he has no choice, because the media is going to ask him that question. They're just going to keep bringing it up until they eventually wear him down into submission.
Yeah, and they will up there.
So I don't blame him for answering the question the way he did. And he answered the question with the way he played the game. He had a very strong game, picked up a couple of goals and an assist along the way, played a real emotional game. You could tell that it was already mentioned to him before the game started, because he definitely had a burr going there. So.
Yeah, he was good, real good.
Speaking of good, real good, we've seen some unbelievable goals this season, and I feel like I don't remember the goals being scored like this in years past. It's almost like guys are trying what they would try in street hockey or, on the ice with their friends on a Saturday afternoon. And I mean, it's just Svechnikov's goal was ridiculous.
Yep, it was.
Lacrosse type style.
It's a byproduct of the new rules. And Sharpie always talks about you have to get to the inside to score. And now you have a willingness to do that, because you're not going to get your head taken off. When I played, and I know when Sharpie did as well, maybe not as much as when I was playing, if you got to those high traffic areas and you looked down to put the puck through your legs and shoot the puck, you were not getting up. I mean, you were going to get rocked. And now the players are much more educated on it.
Yeah.
And the league has done a great job of driving home the fact that, you can't hit up high, you can't hit in the head. It was like your mistake when you got hit in that position. It was your fault for trying to even attempt something like that back in the day, and now it's going to happen more frequently.
I noticed it at the end of my career. I entered the league coming out of college, doing what you want to do as a player. Most guys that play in the NHL were good at every level going up. I was okay in college. And then when I got to the pro level, it was kind of beaten out of me by coaches. Chip the puck in the neutral zone, no turnovers at the blue line, chase after it, play that safe game. And now that's a bad play. My last few years in hockey, that's like turnover when you chip it into the corner and skate after it. I think the fancy moves that we're seeing, the between the legs, the scooping of the puck, I think there's a big YouTube influence on that as well. You're seeing a lot of these guys copy what they see, mimic what they see on YouTube. Patrick Kane, for example. You guys remember when Bauer did the promotional video? Kaner was stick handling through just a center ice full of pucks, and everybody was blown away at how fast it was. And it was. And you got 6, 7, 8-year-olds doing this on their spare time. And fast forward 5 years, they're doing it better than Patrick Kane can do it. So you're seeing the skill level just shoot right through the roof. I think part of it is they're protected now, much like NFL quarterbacks. I don't want to draw too many comparisons to that, but those guys are protected as well, and passing numbers are going through the roof. I think it's great for the league. The more we can show those fancy goals, the better.
And there's skills coaches that every player has individual skills coaches that they work with in the offseason, and now teams are hiring those skills coaches. So now, especially the teams that have a bigger pocketbook, they're out there getting the best skills coaches that are available. And there's days in practice where it's just skills-related practice entirely. I would have left the ice. I mean, I hated to try to work on that because I was a type of player that wanted to eliminate the skilled player. I wanted to do whatever I could to make sure that that guy wasn't going to make me look bad. And there was a lot of veteran players that were like that. They didn't want guys coming in and doing all the things that they're doing today. So it's refreshing. It's great. It makes for great highlights. We don't just have
love it.
We don't just have to show shootout goals to, you know, entertain people with great goals. It's all about goals that are happening at even strength.
So you're not getting a resume together to be a skills coach?
Yeah, no, that's the skills coach thing's not happening.
I mean, you have to have a lot of confidence, though, to be able to pull that off in a game, right, Sharpie? I mean, for these guys to be scoring goals like that, you have to have a little bit of a, you know, swagger about you. And, I mean, Patrick Kane, we know, can do it. We've been seeing him do it for years and years. But when you've got a guy like Svechnikov and Sonny Milano, who we saw the other day, I mean, these aren't guys that you're used to seeing do this move.
No, just about everybody can do that move now. And that's the scary thing about it is in practice, you see the skill level of these guys scooping up pucks and twirling around like a lacrosse stick. And it's only a matter of time before we start seeing this on a nightly basis. I really believe it. It's going to become a move in the league where guys can scoop it. We saw Forsberg from Nashville do it last year against the Hawks, I believe. No, sorry, Dallas Stars. He went around the defenseman full speed, avoided a hit, and tried to scoop it. Didn't score, but he tried to do it at full speed. If that would have gone in, that would have been the best goal I ever saw. So we're going to start seeing more of it, and I think it's a good thing for the league.
Yeah, and again, more time is being put aside for the players to work on those things. And that was never the case before. So, yeah, it's going to continue to happen, and it becomes a real difficult thing to defend against as well for the players that are trying to keep the puck out of the net, including goaltenders. It's a big challenge to come up with creative ways to stop the guys that are beating them.
It's funny how things change, though. Not too long ago, Joel Quenneville was coaching us. It was 2009 or 10, and Christopher Stieg was standing at the side of the net, covered by a player. Puck came to him, and all he had to do was go between the legs and shoot it. He got a shot on goal. It was a great play. He wasn't being a hot dog. He wasn't being fancy. And Joel behind the bench lost his mind. He said he never wants to see that stuff again. I mean, that was 8, 9 years ago, 10 years ago. So now you're being applauded for it, and guys are scoring and making plays doing that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to see how fast the game changes.
I had Joel as an assistant coach when I was in Colorado, and Mark Crawford was the coach who, ironically, now is running the defense in Chicago after Joel left. But I tried to move like through my legs once, and Mark Crawford blew the whistle. He goes, "That's a section 22 move." And I'm like, "What's that mean?" He goes, "You try it again, you'll be in section 22 for the next game." It's an absolute fact of the way. So everything was, you know, pushed the other way.
Yeah.
Especially if you were a grinder that was supposed to, you know, hit. And the old saying, when a crusher becomes a rusher, he soon becomes an usher. That was kind of driven into you if that's the way you played the game.
Funny.
So it's good that they open it up the way they do now.
A lot of changes in the game, and that's affecting some of the veteran players we've seen this week. Mark Stahl was a healthy scratch for the first time in his career for the New York Rangers when they faced the Lightning earlier in the week. Brent Seabrook has now sat 2 straight games as we record this, and that is not good news for the Hawks when you've got a $6.5 million defenseman sitting upstairs. We've just seen it lately, and I mean, Sharpie, there comes a point, and I know you went through this, but in a player's career where you have to accept your role. Brent Seabrook, I know based on his comments, and you can speak to this, but hasn't really. He thinks he can still play at that high level, and he's got 4 more years left on this long-term contract, a no-trade clause. So the Hawks are really, you know, strapped with him at the moment. But I mean, what do you make of all these healthy scratches and what that says about where the game is right now?
Something happens when you turn 30, 33, 34, maybe, that if you have a bad start, a stretch of bad games, everybody's quick to just write you off that you can't play in the league anymore. And these guys that we're mentioning that we're seeing in their mid-30s sitting out for the first time in their career, they can still play in the league. But everybody's so quick to get to that younger player. It's a 25 and under league. It's the salary cap has an influence on that. The comments that Siebes made as far as he still thinks he can play, what else do you want him to say? You know, I would say the same thing. I still think I can play in the league right now. I've been on the studio for 2 years, but you never lose that competitive fire as a player. You're going to see it more and more. And we talked about the opener of the show, those 8-year contracts. Roman Josi, right now, to me, is the best defenseman in the league. Let's check in year 7 or 8. Maybe he's not playing every single night. So it sucks. I went through it in my own personal career, my final year in Chicago. I didn't play a whole lot down the stretch. I understood that. I was excited about retiring in Chicago, but at the same time, it stings a little bit when you're talking about great players like Brent Seabrook, Mark Stahl. These guys have had incredible careers, and now they're watching from the press box. It's not easy on anybody.
I was lucky at the end of my career because I still had 2 years left on my contract, and I had another injury to my knee. And believe me, the team was so excited when they found out that it was a career-ending injury. I mean, there's something to be said about it. Like there used to be what we called survivors, and you didn't want a team with a lot of guys that were just surviving and prolonging their career because they had a different incentive than the younger players that were coming up. And normally it meant you lost the speed to which you played the game at. And I think it's more evident now than it's ever been before because the game has become so much quicker. Those players normally didn't have contracts that said this guy's a $6 million a year player, and here's where he slots in under our salary cap, and he needs to play at that level because that's how important he is to our team based on how much he makes. So it's really hard to look past that now. So even though a player, like in this case, if it's Brent Seabrook, maybe he's playing like a $3 million player now. And that's sufficient for most teams, but he is slotted as the 6, 7, whatever the dollar figure is. And then you start looking at the term, and it becomes even worse than it really is in reality. And a young coach or a coach that's not necessarily dealt with things like this before, it's a hard job for him because he has to give this message to the player, hey, you're not playing, which is always difficult, and then see how the room reacts to that. Because here's a key component of Stanley Cup championship teams that without his leadership, I don't know if you get past Detroit in the year that you're talking about. There were so many key moments that he helped with that organization that everybody looks to him in the locker room as well. So it's a bigger problem there than any of the other ones that I'm looking at because he was so important to the success of the Chicago Blackhawks.
3 cups.
I think what's bothering Siebes in Chicago more than anything is how he's being portrayed in the city from the fans. You know, his relationship with the team, with the players in that locker room, he's fine. He's going to be the great teammate that he's always been throughout my career. I never played with you, Jonesy, but Brent Seabrook is the best teammate I ever had, and I'm not the only one that'll say that. What's another change that we're seeing in the league is players are getting paid for their potential now. They're coming out of their entry-level deals. Hey, this guy might score 30, 40, 50 goals. Let's give him all this money and hope he lives up to it. Siebes, the fans need to remember in the city of Chicago that he's earned that money. In relative terms in the National Hockey League world, it's a lot of money, but 3-time Stanley Cup champion, built that organization up since 2005 until now to what it is. So, you know, sometimes when you see those front-loaded, heavy salary contracts with lots of term on them, you kind of just tip your cap and say, good job, Siebes, thanks for all the years.
And it really goes back to what you were saying about the Josi contract. And I think that's where you become concerned about term and when players have turned 30 and what happens at the end of these contracts. And we've seen it multiple times. But I think general managers at the time, they know it. They know what's going to happen down the road, but they're in a position where if they don't sign this player, it's going to be very difficult to
And just to wrap up on Siebes, it kind of hits home with me because I know him so well and I'm living in Chicago, but what do you want Stan Bowman to do a couple of years ago? You want Siebes to walk out the door? There's been a history in Chicago, and we work with one of them in JR of star players leaving Chicago and going to be stars elsewhere. So Brent Seabrook's one of those guys that nobody's going to wear number 7 in Chicago when he's done. They took care of him. And now everybody wants to beat him up with a couple of years left.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you do have the perspective of how challenging it is to deal with that scrutiny every single day. And I know he's dealt with it from last season. And it's a big media market, Chicago, Boston, New York, Philly. You're going to hear in these markets when you play. That's what you sign up for when you play in these great sports cities. But he's hearing it every single day. Whether or not he's reading about it in the papers, it's the same question at his locker. He knows there's... How hard is that just as an athlete to deal with on a day-to-day basis when you know you're not playing the way you want to play, but you're listening to it every day from the media?
I think it depends who you are as a player. It affects everybody differently. I loved the big market when I was a good player, when I was going to all-star games and winning Stanley Cups. It just fed my confidence and my ego, and it made me an even better player. And then when things started to turn in my career, I was happy to be in Dallas, in Texas, and we had one beat writer covering the team. They didn't have to document my struggles that second year in Dallas. So you see free agent signings. A lot of guys pick cities based on those big media markets. To me, it comes down to the individual. Some guys like to hide in a quiet city. That's when they thrive at their best. Other guys want that spotlight. So Siebes isn't the guy that's shying away at all from the spotlight.
And sometimes it's the position that you play on the team. Like if you're the goaltender, everyone sees it. If you're a centerman and you're wearing the C on your jersey, everybody sees it. If you're a defenseman, there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
So that
Collecting
becomes a big issue
on a
as
team
well.
That can't score goals right now. Yeah.
For a winger, there's ways to get around.
Yeah.
I mean,
your mistakes aren't as evident as other guys.
It's a fact. I mean, and that's why centermen are normally paid the most, and goal. I mean, it's all relevant, but at the same time, there is certain spots on the ice that you're not as noticeable, and you're not as important. So unfortunately,
you liked the big spotlight, didn't you?
No, I liked it. I just didn't get it. I tried.
That's awesome. All right, we're going to talk about Halloween pranks coming up in a little bit. We've got more to come, but the Tampa Bay Lightning have been up and down so far this season. A very interesting storyline for them. Pierre Maguire had a chance to sit down for a wide-ranging conversation with Lightning general manager Julien BriseBois.
Well, Julien BriseBois, the head of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Imagine that. Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure, Pierre.
We're looking forward to it. This is your second year running the Tampa Bay Lightning. How is that going?
I'm enjoying it a lot. First and foremost, I enjoy the people I get to interact with every day, the people that we're in the trenches together, the coaches, the players, the other members of management. We have the best owner in sports in Jeff Vinik. So it's a really good job. Let's not kid ourselves. Being general manager of an NHL team, it's a really cool job. And I feel like I have the best one right now, working with the people I get to work with.
Speaking of cool, you grew up in the province of Quebec. You worked for the Montreal Canadiens. You did some work in the city of Quebec, Quebec City. They don't have an NHL team anymore. We'll get there later on in the interview. What's it like to live in Florida, being a guy from Quebec?
I can only speak for living in Tampa, because Florida is a big state, and I'm sure it's different in Jacksonville or Tallahassee than it is in Tampa, and Tampa is different from Miami. But for a guy like myself, married with 2 young kids, the quality of life is really top-notch. It would be hard to beat. The schools are good. It's safe. The commutes are easy. The fan support has been tremendous. The community has really rallied behind the Lightning over the years. The number of ice rinks have grown. The quality of the youth hockey programs has really gone up. So my wife and I feel really privileged that we get to live in Tampa and raise our children there.
You know, you talked about Jeffrey Vinik before. I agree with you. I think he's the best owner in the National Hockey League. I think he's the best owner in all of professional sport. I really do. I had a chance to interview with him many years ago, and I just respect him very much. What has he enabled you to do to grow your brand as a leader?
Well, ultimately, as the leader, like his job, I think, is to provide us with a vision, objectives, and then provide us resources and support. And I know that every time I come to him with ideas, which usually come with a price tag, usually he has to dig into his pocket to support my ideas. He's been tremendous. And even going back to when Steve Yzerman was our general manager, and I got the chance to work with him for 8 years, Jeff has always been super supportive. Ultimately, what he wants is to bring the Stanley Cup back to Tampa. And that's my mandate. That's what I'm in charge of trying to do, help our NHL team bring the cup back to Tampa.
You've worked with some fascinating people. Let's just talk about Bob Gainey. What'd you learn from Bob?
Bob is a special human being. On top of being the great hockey player that he was and the fabulous general manager that he was, he is probably the wisest man that I have ever met. And I think he acquired that wisdom through going through a lot of things in his personal life that the price tag was very heavy. But just an incredible leader. Everyone in Montreal would have gone through a wall for him, from players to support staff to people in management. He was just, he cared about all of us. He supported us. He mentored me. He gave me the keys to our AHL farm team. And he essentially, I remember he symbolically kind of handed me keys just like I'm doing now. I said, hey, you got the keys now. Go compete against the other guys. Show them what you can do. And I was fired up. I was young. I was excited about the opportunity. And while I worked in that capacity, sometimes he knew I was about to make a mistake. and he let me make the mistake so I could learn. And that takes a special guy to be able to do that, especially in a market where you're scrutinized as much as we were in Montreal. Takes a special kind of leader to do something like that.
So after you made that mistake, or 2 or 3 or whatever it was.
Too many to count.
No, but how did he talk to you?
I think he just knew that I had learned. I had learned from it. There was never "I told you so." That never came up. I don't think he's ever used those words in his life. He just knew that was going to make me a better leader down the road, and he wants to surround himself with strong people. And the better I got at my job, the better I could be in helping him do his job. And he had that long-term vision for the organization, and just I'll never be able to repay him for everything he did for me when I got a chance to work for him, because I was just a young guy with very little to offer at first, and he allowed me to grow into a hockey executive. And that led to the opportunity of going and working with Steve Yzerman and kind of rebuilding the Tampa Bay Lightning organization over a number of years. And that opportunity led to the opportunity I have right now of being the general manager of the Lightning.
So you brought up Steve Yzerman's name. Bob Gainey played for the Peterborough Petes. He's a Hockey Hall of Famer.
They both have.
Steve Yzerman, Hockey Hall of Famer, Peterborough Pete. What'd you learn from Steve?
Steve had a really clear vision for what he wanted the Lightning to be from day one. And I didn't have that vision necessarily when we started working together, but he knew this is the type of team I want, this is the style of play I want, and he stuck to it. Even when we didn't necessarily have the players to play that style, he was looking long term. Eventually, if we're gonna have the type of success that he envisioned for our organization, we needed to bring skill in. We needed to bring guys that could play with pace, and we drafted accordingly, and we developed accordingly, and we've kind of built a team that today looks like the team that he had envisioned way back into 2010.
I would agree on, excuse me, everything you just said. One thing that a lot of people don't know about you is you're a trained attorney, but you're a master negotiator. You know the numbers, and you know the league bylaws unbelievably well. So the Steven Stamkos contract is fascinating, because there were a lot of teams that wanted him, and there were a lot of teams that offered him more money, but yet you guys were persuasive enough. It never became a public display of negotiation. How did you manage to do that on such a high-profile player?
Well, again, a lot of the credit should go to Steve Yzerman. He was the general manager. He was managing that file. He took the lead on that file. And I'd say half the credit goes to Steve, the other half goes to Steven, because there was never ill will amongst any of the parties. I think Stammer wanted to stay in Tampa, and eventually he did stay in Tampa because he wanted to stay in Tampa, and we wanted him to stay. But in a cap world, I always say when we make player personnel decisions, it's the player, the person, and the contract. And we agreed on the player, we agreed on the person. We knew they were superstars, like Steven Stamkos is a superstar human being, he's a superstar player. The contract's just as important, though. It had to make sense, and it took a long time for us to agree on a number, but ultimately Stammer wanted to stay in Tampa, and he's had the chance to be on a really good team ever since, and knock at the door of a cup every year, because he was willing to leave some money on the table to allow us to keep as many good players as possible. And he was the first one, and many players have followed in his footsteps since. As soon as he did, Victor Hedman did, and many have since then. And it's allowed us to keep probably a bigger nucleus of really good players than we otherwise would have been able to.
You were a good baseball player, better than a hockey player. Yes. But because of your attorney status, you did arbitration for both baseball and for hockey before you really got to the managerial level. Take us through a baseball arbitration, because I've been in hockey arbitration. Are they similar?
They're very different, actually, for a number of reasons, starting with the antitrust exemption that Major League Baseball has. So not to get too technical, but when we did salary arbitration for Major League Baseball teams, Major League Baseball was very involved in the process. Whereas when we do salary arbitration cases on behalf of NHL teams, the NHL isn't really involved. So that was the first difference. I actually was able to, I ended up attending a Major League Baseball general managers meeting before I ever attended an NHL GM meeting. And I remember I was in Virginia near Dallas Airport, and there's an attorney from Major League Baseball there, and he had every name of every salary arbitration eligible Major League player, and they were ranked from 1 to about 200. And I remember Derek Jeter was one, Andrew Jones was two, and it kind of went down the list. And everyone commented on everyone's cases. Hockey's very different. There's an attorney, there's a club, and we kind of work in smaller groups, and we're not necessarily interacting with the other teams to see what they're doing or how their cases are going. So that was a big difference. The process is also very different. In Major League Baseball, you have 3 arbitrators, and it's a majority decision, and they don't have to justify their decision. And it's a either or. So either they give 100% credence to what the player requested, or they end up agreeing 100% with what the club submitted. In hockey, the arbitrators have the power to go anywhere in between, and they have to justify their decision. So there are pros and cons to both systems. But it was, I think, having had the chance to do salary arbitration for a Major League Baseball team allowed us to become better at representing NHL teams over the years as well.
Are they as mean-spirited in baseball in those arbitrations as they are in hockey? Because sometimes those hockey ones can get pretty personal.
I think it's the same. It always depends on who the actors are, who the general manager is, who the player is, who the agent is. That's what will dictate the tone, I think, of the hearing, whether it's an NHL hearing or a Major League Baseball hearing. Most of the time, and I've lost track. I've probably worked on 60 or 70 NHL cases, maybe more. Only one really was acrimonious. Most of the time, like, you're going to have to work with that player again. That player is going to have to work with that GM again. There's usually a mutual respect there, and it kind of comes back to what I said earlier. If the team submitted a qualifying offer to the player, making it eligible for salary arbitration, that means they like the player, they like the person. Otherwise, they wouldn't. And the disagreement really is only about the contract at that point.
How much pressure are you feeling right now with your team, knowing that the expectation is so large, and last year the disappointment was so heavy?
I don't know. Like, I see it more as an opportunity, and every year's been the same. We go into the season knowing that we have a good team, and that we will have the opportunity to challenge for a Stanley Cup. The issue is we're not the only ones, and I would think that this year in particular, there's probably more teams that are probably on paper considered Stanley Cup contenders than I've been in the league since the year 2000. I don't remember a year where there was so much parity and so many good teams. And this is going to play itself out. Some teams are going to have injuries, and some teams are going to get on hot streaks, and other teams are going to have a tough. If you get through a tough patch early in the year, you can work your way out of contention. Although St. Louis might disagree with that, considering how their season turned out last year, or even Carolina, who struggled early in the year last year and had a fabulous run down the stretch. But this year in particular, I just feel going into the season that there were probably more high-end teams than ever before.
The Tampa Bay Lightning in 2004 were the first non-traditional hockey market. Dallas could be in there. Dallas could be in there too, but I'm talking about Florida, California. Dallas had a history of hockey with the Dallas Blackhawks, Toronto Maple Leafs farm team. But I'd say there's pressure on Tampa. Tampa won the Cup in 2004, and you've been back to the final. You played Chicago. Didn't win that one. Great Chicago team. Do you feel that? Do you feel that you got to step up again?
Again, I think it's more opportunity. We see a lot of the 04 players. A lot of them still live in Tampa. Dave Andrechuk still works for us. Yeah, it's like I said earlier, like, the quality of life is incredible. They should want to stay. Stan Netchgash is around. He's involved in youth hockey. Dmitry Afanasenkov is around. Vinny Lecavalier is around. We're trying to write our own history. Like, this year's team, it gets a fresh start. It's a new team. We're not the same team as last year. There's a turnover in terms of players, and even the returning players, they're not the same player they were a year ago. Like, they've got an extra year of training, an extra year of experience, an extra year of lessons learned along the way. Some by getting swept by Columbus in the first round last year. So this is a new team, and it has the opportunity to write its own story and write its own ending. So I look at it more as an opportunity for us to win something than us, chasing the past or trying to defend our status as being a contender year in, year out.
Julien, one of the things that was really, I thought, handled very well was the Marty St. Louis situation, and when he left Tampa. How difficult, take us behind the scenes, how difficult was that whole situation when he got moved from Tampa, obviously, to New York?
100% of the credit goes to Steve Yzerman in regards to how that matter was handled. it was very difficult. You know, in our business, we have to make decisions, and we make decisions based on the hands that we've been dealt more often than not. Steve was dealt a really tough hand, and he managed it as well as I think anyone could have. And all the credit goes to Steve for how he had a vision for the end game. He stayed completely rational, even though it was, I'm sure, emotionally draining. And ultimately, he was able to come up with a trade that really pushed our organization forward. So we took what looked like a tough hand, and Steve was able to turn it into a positive. And our organization really took a step forward from that point on. Ryan Callahan was exactly the type of player we needed to come in. And we got some really good high-end picks, some first-round picks out of that trade as well that we used later on actually to get McDonough and JT Miller, and all the credit really goes to Steve Yzerman for that trade.
You look at Tampa Bay as a hockey market, it's like a must-see place to go watch a hockey game now. You know, Nashville's another one of those places. Vegas is another one of those places. What went in? Because I remember going to Tampa early on, and it was not like that. When I was coaching the league, guys were taping their sticks under palm trees. Now all of a sudden, it really is. It's a must-see destination for hockey. How did you get to that level?
You know, again, I had nothing to do with that. That was all our business ops people. That's Jeff Vinik. That's Todd Leiweke, who's our former CEO, who is now CEO in Seattle. Steve Griggs, our current CEO, who came in at the same time or thereabouts as Todd Leiweke and Jeff Vinik. Again, they had a vision for how, and really it started with Jeff Vinik, because I remember my first meeting with Jeff Vinik, he was telling me about his vision for the organization, why he bought the team, and ultimately he wanted to use it as a vehicle to do good in the community and to make the lives of the people in the community better than it actually is right now. And that sounded to me like pie in the sky, to be honest, a little bit. Like, that sounds great, but I don't know that you can actually do that. I'll go back to working in the hockey ops while you guys work on that. But 8, 9, 10 years later, they were able to do it. And what happened, I think Jeff and the organization gave so much back to the community through the community hero, the $50,000 donation at every game to a community hero to give to the charity of his choice or her choice, the 4,000 hours of community service that the organization commits to doing during office hours in the community every year. And we largely surpassed the 4,000 hours. I think last year we were probably 7,000 or 8,000 hours of community service during business hours. All the donations that the Vinik family, both Jeff and Penny, have done in the community to different charities, the involvement on different boards, that ultimately the pitch to the community was the organization does so much that you as a business leader need to support us. It's your civic duty to buy season tickets. And they were very cheap at the time. And people started buying tickets. And then we started having a little bit of success making it into the playoffs. And people started coming to games. Because at first they had tickets, they weren't coming to games. Then they had tickets, started coming to games when we started to win a little bit more. And then they fell in love with the sport, they fell in love with the team. And now the number of ice rinks has doubled in the last 10 years in the area, and we're short. We need more ice. Both my sons they're 12 and 10. They both play Pee Wee. This year there are 2 AAA teams in the state. There are 10 AA teams. There are 24 A teams and a bunch of rec leagues. There's a high school league now where teams are fighting for national championships. So it's really grown, and the credit really goes to Jeff and Todd Leiweke and Steve Griggs and all of our business people who've done a tremendous job over the years.
When you were a young kid growing up in the province of Quebec, did you ever think you'd be working in the National Hockey League?
Never crossed my mind.
What'd you want to do?
I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know why, but I know at least going as far back as being a 4th grader, a 10-year-old, knowing that I wanted to be a lawyer. That sounded to be LA law, on the news, prime ministers were former lawyers. That sounds to be like a path towards success. So I knew I wanted to go to law school. And when I was in law school, I thought I was going to be a tax attorney. I love working with numbers. I love numbers. And then I was lucky enough to be hired at a really good firm, a national firm, Heenan Blakey, yeah. No longer exists, but it was a fabulous firm with very politically connected, very strong labor law department, and luckily for me, they had contacts at the NHL level. And as I was applying for an articling position, they told me they wanted to start a sports law department, and they were looking for someone who was bilingual, who knew about sports, who could be a junior associate helping some of the partners developing a sports law department. And I got the job and I started working in sports. I wasn't even looking to work in sports, just serendipity.
People talk about the NHL being a copycat league. Does the vision for the management team and the scouting staff change after you see what St. Louis did last year and the way they played and approached the playoffs?
I think probably the number one lesson is that, you know, where you are in the standings in January isn't that important. You know, there's still runway as long as you have a good team. I think the general consensus at the time was that St. Louis was a better team than their record, and you know, it obviously worked out for them. The copycat league, I think we're always trying to learn from other organizations. Sometimes it's more obvious, sometimes it's more subtle, but we're always looking at what the others are doing and trying to learn from them and make sure we don't fall behind.
You talk about numbers. We had a big contract signed earlier this week. Roman Josi just signed a huge deal. You're seeing a lot of younger players coming out of entry level signing massive deals. Are you surprised that out of entry level so many guys are getting such long contracts at big numbers?
I'm not, because every organization is at a different point in their success cycle. What they're trying to accomplish might be different. Their short-term, mid-term, long-term views of where that organization is or where it's going is different from one organization to the next. So sometimes I see contracts and I go, well, that makes a lot of sense for that organization to sign that player to that contract. Good for them. They did some good work. It wouldn't work for us. And I'm sure some of the contracts we sign, other teams are going, oh, good for Tampa, hopefully that's what they're thinking. But it wouldn't work for us in our market for whatever reason, because that's not where our organization is today. So everyone works really hard. The other thing I mentioned earlier, you get to work with these other general managers and their assistant GMs, and like everyone's smart, everyone's hardworking, everyone's passionate, everyone knows what they're doing. They're good at what they're doing. That's how they got there. And ultimately, they make the best decisions for their organization based on, again, the cards that they've been dealt. And we're all trying to do that.
Well, you're good at what you do. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Really good visiting you. Thank you very much.
Same here. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Pierre. Great conversation there. We're going to be keeping an eye on the Lightning all this season. Definitely a very talented team, a lot of offensive weapons, great defense, good goaltending, but it's been interesting to see what's happened so far. So more to come on the Lightning, but guys, it's Halloween week, so
You
we're
can
going
tell
to get
we're
into
excited about it.
yeah, I'm like, where's the costumes?
Trick or treat.
Yeah, true. I personally I don't love Halloween. I was always scared of everything growing up.
Not surprised.
So,
Yeah.
and I never had any trick-or-treaters on my street. I grew up on a street. My parents still live there, 36 years. We've never had one single trick-or-treater.
That's good. Good for you. You guys
Well,
are
long
lucky.
country road. No one wanted to walk down the dark street to get to our house. So anyway,
You're supposed to put out like a
we did
jack-o'-lantern,
everything.
you know,
My
and
mom
put
to
some
this day still
decorations
puts
on.
candy
People
out.
come
Nobody
to do
comes.
that.
I feel bad for her. It's like
Leave
a
a
joke
light
in our
on for the
family.
kids,
No
like,
lights.
yeah.
We're worried people like you show up.
Get
We
the
can put
message.
that address on the bottom.
Yeah, let's tweet that out.
Yeah.
Any fun prank stories, Sharpie? I'll start with you. Anything over the years playing hockey?
No real prank stories from Halloween. Halloween is, it was always a fun event for the team, for me anyway. That was always like our team bonding experience, end of October, first month of the season, 2 if you count training camp. And it was a good opportunity for all the guys and families to get together and have some fun for once. And my costumes were always built off comfort.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you have a favorite?
I was always the Top Gun dude. You know, I had the bomber suit,
Nice.
one
That's
piece.
great.
It was
Maverick
comfortable.
goose.
Put some glasses on. I could bounce around the bars in Chicago and get around comfortably. The best costume I ever saw was in Dallas 2 years in a row. 2 different costumes. Cody Eakin, who is a great teammate as well. The second year, he was dressed up as Larry David. And he had full hair and makeup, right, with the bald head and all that. But the year previous to that, he was Conan O'Brien. And, of course, Eeks has
He's got the red hair.
The red hair. So he had a professional team, hair and makeup come in. They caked on about an inch or 2 of makeup on his face. And the next morning, Lindy had a practice, and Eeks slept in, showed up to the rink 6 or 7 minutes before practice. As he was coming to the rink, all the guys were going out in full equipment to the ice. He's still in full Conan O'Brien gear. So quickly put his gear on and practiced as Conan O'Brien. That was probably one of the funniest Halloween things.
That's an awful feeling being late, too. Oh, my God.
And then dressed up at the same time. It's like you didn't just oversleep. You're pretty much continuing your night from last night at that point. Jonesy, you're a prankster. I know you've got something.
So when I was in Washington, I was thinking about this when you guys asked about it. Joe Juno was going to have the Halloween party. Always somebody has the party, right? And it's a big day. It's like everyone's all done up, and the wives and the players. And I was single at the time, and I had a buddy that was visiting from home. His name's Rich, right? So he was there. So we went and got these costumes. And while we're looking at these costumes, there's one that's just a mask. This guy with a mask, and you can't tell who's underneath this mask. It's like impossible.
See,
all
that's
you can
what I
see,
hate about Halloween.
all you can see is the eyes.
me out.
You'll understand this. So I picked that, and I had these coveralls on. I had a pair of work boots on, right?
Or coveralls, overalls? Is that okay?
Whatever they are. Yeah. So
yeah.
So I get to this party, and I don't speak. Like, I don't say a word. All I do, and he's got a costume on where they wouldn't know that he was with me, even though they had met him before. So I think he had I don't even know what he had on his head, but you couldn't tell who it was. Anyway, I would stare at everybody. And it was a real creepy looking mask.
No
It was like an
kidding.
older man. And I mean, it was really bothersome to the wives. And I would just sit there and I'd just look him right in the eye.
Oh, that's
It was
weird.
so bad, right? But I never spoke. And no one knew that it was me because there was a few other masks around and there was some unknown people there under the mask. So anyway, Jim Johnson, who I play with, a former defenseman, not Jimmy Johnson from the Cowboys, but Jim Johnson, he had a similar type of outfit on, but different, and different pair of pants and a different pair of boots, but the same kind of a mask that you had no idea who it was. So I see him, and I knew it was him, and I go, hey, come on. So we go upstairs and change. We flip the entire outfits, right? And none of us have spoken yet. So now I've got his whole deal on, even to the to the footwear. So my buddy who's with me, I never said nothing to him either, right? So we're back down, and I'm doing the same type of thing. And all of a sudden, my buddy's beside me, right? And I've known him forever. And he looks, and now he doesn't realize it's me. He thinks I'm the
Jim Johnson.
or whoever it was wearing. So, and Jimmy Johnson's walking around with my mask on, doing the same stuff. And my buddy Rich is tapping me. He goes, hey. He goes, hey. I go, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, he goes, look at this asshole, he says, about me. And he's pointing at me, and I'm like,
oh my God.
uh-huh. Yeah.
He's talking
And he just says, look at him. He thinks he runs this party. He thinks it's all about himself. He says,
Knowing that
yes,
that's you, but it really wasn't you.
not
Thinking that's you,
thinking
though.
that's me wandering
Oh my
around there. And
gosh.
he's spilling the beans about all the things that I'm doing wrong in my life. It was unbelievable. So I said, finally, someone asked me, they said, how did he find out it was you? And I said, when I told him to go,
Yeah.
all of a sudden my voice comes out and his face was like, ah!
Whoops.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
That was something else.
Yeah, you're a real
The other
treat.
funny Halloween thing we had, too, was Johnny Leclaire. When Johnny Leclaire had a few cocktails, he became Johnny Vermont because he could get a little crazy, right? So Luke Richardson, Keith Primo had a Christmas party, or a Halloween party at his house. So Luke Richardson got a Leclaire jersey, number 10, with the Flyers on it. And on the back, he put across the nameplate, Johnny Vermont.
Oh,
He wore one of them baseball hats with the 2 beer cups on, and he drank himself like all night long. And he drank more than he ever drank in his life.
my
And he was
gosh.
belligerent, and it was like Johnny Vermont. Johnny kept looking over at it and shaking his head as he was looking at it. But that was one of the more creative ideas that I
for
saw,
sure.
too.
Not
They were good
surprised you
times.
bring up-
Halloween parties are great.
They come at a good time in the hockey season also.
Early in the year, bring the guys together.
For sure.
Bring the families
Some
together
fun.
too, right? You mentioned, all the wives go out and so Sharpie,
Yeah.
you've got 2 little girls at home though, so I know they're dressing up for Halloween this week.
Oh, yeah, we do multiple dress-ups with those 2 girls. They did. They got some deer costumes. I think that's more my wife, Abby. She wants to look cute in a Halloween outfit, so the 3 girls are going to go as a set of deer, and they're all about the Disney characters these days. So Halloween night we'll be patrolling the Chicago area with a bunch of descendants, I guess it is. and
Descendants.
Get a good haul around
be fun.
Chicago.
Lots
Get
of
some
candy.
good candy.
we live on a good street.
Yeah.
Say, you
it's
probably
good.
don't have to go around the street.
I
Like
used to have
once or
to
twice.
drive to the good street.
That's what I did
Yeah,
too.
see? There
And
you
people
go.
like you and the creepy masks are the reason why I
Did
don't
anyone
like
ever cut the
Halloween.
bottom of the bag as a kid? That happened in our neighborhood. It was terrible.
That's just mean.
Stole all my
Grew up in
candy.
a rough.
Yeah.
It might have been
Little
me
concerned.
that did it, but I don't want
It
to.
explains a lot though, doesn't it, Sharpie?
Yeah.
All
Got a
right.
chip on his shoulder.
Yes.
Yeah. Or
On
Reese's
that note,
Pieces.
that's good. Yeah, that's gonna wrap up another episode of Our Line Starts. Patrick Sharp, well done.
Thank you.
We're gonna bring you back another time. Remember, a new episode drops every Wednesday throughout the hockey season. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts for automatic downloads, and we're gonna see you next time. Enjoy.